Welcome to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, where insights, attitudes, and methods for success get illuminated. Learn what leaders and change workers have done and are doing now to create magnificent futures. We interview great guests who inspire you to overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Be sure you visit our website at self-helpcoaching.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, just relax as you listen. You can do something else, but be ready to make an important note. And let's get started.
The title of this interview is Mastering the Job Search Process. And my guest is Abbie Martin. We'll be talking about self-help, communication. We'll be talking about how the hiring manager and the recruiter go about their job search. When someone is looking for a job, they have a blind spot for how it works because they are fearful of rejection or not having a job. Abbie Martin helps the job seekers be more strategic and confident in how they approach their job search. And who is Abbie Martin? Well, she has been in the recruiting industry since 1996. She has placed thousands of candidates and become sought after as a coach to help candidates and hiring managers alike during the hiring process. Her expertise is vast as she has worked in lockstep with private equity and CEOs in a variety of industries, including government contracting, software, energy, CPG. Abbie, what's CPG?
Consumer packaged goods.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And many more through years serving clients through recruiting firms. That's great. So you work with the firms too.
Yeah, I've done both.
She has helped hire all levels from the mailroom to the CEO. You actually hired CEOs?
Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. Giving her a unique perspective. Her degree in industrial/organizational psychology, partnered with more than 25 years of expertise, puts her in the position to offer you extremely valuable guidance on how to best navigate your career search or hiring process. That's a very valuable, not just skill set, certainly, but what you offer to a person. As I said when I first met you, this is a constantly relevant situation. Welcome.
It is. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Tony.
My pleasure. And as I said to you earlier, I've had all sorts of guests in business and in personal development. You are the first one in the hiring field that I've had. So that's
I love it.
Precedent, and I my pleasure. And I'm check hiring coach check. Okay, as of today, great stuff. So my first question:
Okay.
Where do things go wrong in the interview process?
So I would answer that from two different perspectives. The first is the hiring manager, and that is usually they haven't defined the role very well, right? Like they go in and they started off wrong. From the job seeker perspective, I'm very keen on you have to be really clear on your absolutes. So that way you can weed things out. When you are desperate and you're needing a job, it's really funny what you will let come through the search and be like, even though you would hate that job, you go for it anyway because you just need a job.
Okay,
and
so
then
you're saying they compromise, and by having an absolute, it's like saying that's something I won't do or
Yeah.
give up. Okay.
You need to really be very clear where you're most successful at and really focus on those things, because what happens is every job seeker goes crazy. They have to have everything in their resume, everything ever listed, and they can do everything. And that's when I know that this is not a person who's very clear on what they want, and they're going to have a hard time in their job search because they literally could give me everything. They're like, you know what I mean? Like they're like, whatever it is, I just need it. And when you do that, people see right through that and they're like, well, then you're probably not the right person for this job, because I need you to be passionate about this job, or this company. And when you're all over the map, you really
never,
yeah,
the great
it
mistake
shows.
that most people have is they want to please everyone.
Exactly.
Right?
And it's better to just say no, have a checklist beforehand. Here's my 3 non-negotiables. right? Like if the company is under 5 million, not doing it. You know, if they whatever the case may be, like you have your 3 non-negotiables and you have to stick to those. Otherwise, you're taking something and then you're looking again in a year.
Okay, let's address that. Let's say you have the example you gave, a 5 million revenue annual company, right? So
Right.
say that you're looking at a company, so whether it makes it into your net search or you're actually in the interview and they don't have the 5 mil, say they've got 4 or whatever.
Right.
So, but you liked, but everything else checks off. Should you compromise then?
I think I would. I'm always a queen of the caveats. I'm like, well, I would say if all of your other ones are met, right? And if you come to me and I have clients who, you know, it's like we negotiate it, right? Is this really the right fit? And if you're just off a little bit, I think you can do that because you meet everything else. So you don't need to be,
You don't have
you
to
know,
be
but
rigid.
what I see, to be honest, is people will come and they will throw everything off their list for the first offer that comes through. That's what I'm talking
It
about. Yeah,
seems to me is that you want to always be flexible, but you don't want to be desperate.
exactly. Yeah. The interviewer can tell it,
Yeah.
you know, and then it comes back and it shows in your offer there, because we're, you know, the recruiters were like, listen, they're actually really desperate. They really need a job. You could probably go 10K less. It happens more often than you would think.
Yeah, I bet. And now what about from the hiring manager's perspective?
Yeah. So the
Wait,
hiring manager.
did you want to say any more about the person?
No, I mean, for that question, I think like
Okay,
that's where I see it go wrong for most people. It's
right.
like I just had a client just send me their updated resume, and I mean it's like it's the kitchen sink, right? Like it's everything. And I'm like, you need to remember when whoever it is, if it's a recruiter or if it's a hiring manager, they need to see what's on their job description, what they know they need. They just need to see
So
that.
should you tailor your resume for different submissions, different
Yes.
fields? Okay.
I hate to say that because I feel like it makes everybody go, oh. But what I do when I create your resume, we do some bullet points, and I'm like, those are like, leave the core pieces in there over what you did, over, you know, what your accomplishments were, but then you want to leave some space. You're looking at the job description from the hiring manager, and you are going, okay, how, you know, what do I have that's not listed in my resume that's in here? Use some of the same words, use some of the same context, so you can put those in there, because that's most of the time in this day and age now, you're dealing with the recruiter first, and the recruiters, I would say, I'm making up the numbers here, but I'm thinking it's probably at least 90% are not experts in that field. There's some where there are, right?
Right.
So we all are, you know, we know a lot about, or a little about a lot. And so we're going off the job description.
Right.
And if your resume says what my job description says, I'm calling you, right? Whereas if you're just submitting the same one and you're hoping that I can read through the lines, a lot of these recruiters are coming right out of college. They don't know the industry. They don't know the workforce yet. So when you get
The
more seasoned,
recruiters are coming out of college. They went to school
yes,
for it, and that's their
they don't
thing.
even, unless something has changed, most of us, because I've recruited a lot of recruiters, we've all fallen into recruiting. Like nobody goes to college going, I'm going to be a recruiter. So you fall into it. You're like, well, I like sales, I like talking to people, and I like helping. And then you're like, oh, like this is great. I think the same thing about real estate. Usually people, it's like, oh, I think I could do that, let me try. But the point, going back to it, is if you are, you know, this recruiter who's right out of school reading off of a script, you need your resume to trigger something for them to go, oh, this could be a good fit for this requisition, this job that I'm working on.
Now, I just had this conversation just the other day with my girlfriend. She said that when right out of college, she had no experience. So when she made her resume, she made all this stuff up. What do you got to say about that?
I wouldn't do it. I would,
Yeah, and that sounds, I mean, this sounds unethical. I mean, right off the
yeah,
bat.
and I get it. I guess it would depend on what a person made up, like, but honestly, it just always comes back to bite you. I was hiring for one client a lot of low-level salespeople, right? Like, this is not, it wasn't rocket science. And I would say to them, they're going to do an education verification. If you don't have a degree, they'll still hire you. Please take it off your resume if it's
It's false.
if it's not going to come back clear. And every one of them, oh no, I've got my degree. And every one of them would get busted, and I'd be like, you would have still got the job.
So wait, so they lied on the resume and they lied to you as well.
Yeah. And so when you get
You're
caught
supposed
in
to
that,
be on their side. Did they forget that?
they just that because most people don't do an employment verification, so they're like, I'll get away with it. And then me as the recruiter, I'm on their side being like, you could resubmit a different resume to me and nobody would know. And then they don't want to do it for whatever reason. So I think most people who make up stuff, if you get caught, you're gonna get fired. It's not worth it, in my opinion.
Right. I mean, you're telling the person once you get caught that you are dishonest. Who
Yeah.
wants a dishonest person working at their company?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. And so you need to be honest about what, goes back to the first question. What can you really do? Where are you best suited, right? You got to be really clear on that,
I'm a committed personal developer. I mean, besides, I was a life coach and blah, 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 practitioner of NLP and whatever.
Okay.
But going back all the way to 30 years ago, that's when I really got into self-help, personal development, and started committing to it. And I realized, actually learned would be even more precise, that what I need to become is very valuable or potentially valuable or seemingly valuable to a prospective hirer. Never mind what my claims are of experience or education. That's great, and probably even necessary to whatever degree.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, if I could convince an employer that I'm very valuable and I would benefit the company and I wouldn't be a problem,
Yeah.
then they'll good chance they'll hire me.
Yeah.
What do you think about that philosophy?
Yeah, that's the way that I describe it, and the way that I train hiring managers to interview is I'll say past behavior is a good predictor of future behavior.
Yeah.
So find out, ask them questions that go deep into why, like, there's some of their success. So whatever you're listing as accomplishments, I want to know how you got there. What was your decision-making process when you did that? That's when the hiring manager lights start going off and they're like, this person gets it. We work well together and they've done it before, So if you go into the interview and you're like, oh, I could do that. I'm sure I could. Which people do, you want to be able to have stories as to how you've already done that, or how that in theory because of this sort of example. Because if they feel very good about that, you have that expertise and you've been through that sort of situation, and they can feel, because I talk about it from the intuitive sense, you want the hiring manager to just feel like they can trust you. That comes from that you can speak to some of these things with authority, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. Great stuff. Let's take a moment to hear from our sponsor, and we'll come right back with Abbie Martin.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Proficio. Ever heard of accelerated learning techniques? What if you learned more deeply than ever before? What if you remembered what you learned far better than ever before? Visit www.proficio.io. That's proficio.io, where you can understand perhaps better than ever before.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza. We're having a very valuable conversation with Abbie Martin about the hiring process, the ins and outs, both sides. Let me ask you a question, Abbie. You ever come across the supremely confident person who perhaps has an impoverished background that says or proposes to a prospective employee, I'll work free for a month. And if you don't like me, you ever get that?
Yeah. Oh, yes. a lot, particularly when I was working at a software company. But even that's not even true. I get it a lot. In a recruiting firm, people call and it's that desperation piece. I'll do
Yeah.
anything. I'll do anything. I'll do anything. And of course, your heart bleeds and you're like, what can I get them? And then the hiring manager is like, like I said, they want to feel good,
So
not like
it's not, it doesn't even come across as supreme confidence. It just comes across as desperate. That's what
it
they
does
say.
most of the time. I think there's a way you could do it of like, I'm so confident, but I'm not, there's a way.
If you could
But
pull it off, if
if you can pull it
you're,
off, like I'm not saying it's never
you have an
happened.
awareness of psychology,
Yeah.
you can read a person well, right?
Yeah.
But not.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
if they just come in and they're like, hey, listen, I could really use a shot. Like, I know I have a lot to offer. That's different than how you're saying it, which is how it comes across. I mean, I've had people begging me, calling me, sending me pictures of their families. Like, it's hard when they're, and I get that. Like, I know that you're motivated and you need the job, but this is the best advice that I ever got when I was my very first job, and I went to my VP and I was like, I really need a raise. I'm moving out of my mom's house. I'm getting a new car. And she looked at me and she was like, I need to tell you this and I don't want to hurt your feelings. She said, but your life is not my business. What you need to do is turn around and come back in here and tell me the value that you will present to me in this company, and then I can give you a raise based off of your merit. So that stuck with me forever. Like, I still get chills when she said that, because most people aren't that direct. And I've told that story to so many candidates, like, please don't do this to people. Like, that's not going to get you the job.
Now,
You
it
have
seems
to
to
show
me
your merit.
that's abundantly obvious, as echoed by what I said 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And it also seems to me that in today's climate, whether it be social, political, environmental, whatever I want to frame it, that's getting lost more and more. People are wanting to shift focus or put a person's attention on something other than their merit and value.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's up with that? And how's it working out in the hiring field and the employment relationship?
If I look back, I'm like, there are definitely scenarios where I see a person has made a connection and I can look at it and I'm like, I don't like, this is not going to work. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have the experience, they don't have the right skill set, all of these other things, but they made a connection with the hiring manager. And 9 times out of 10, I'm replacing that person in 3 months. So when you lose sight of that, if it's not the right fit, it doesn't tend to work. I mean, and so and this is not normal in the recruiting world, but my firm offered a guarantee, right? So I was very cognizant of that guarantee, because if I had to find you another person, that's money out of my pocket. So I wanted it to be a fit the first time. So I would really push on the hiring managers and being like, I think you're getting sucked in by a good story here, or a really good interview. Like, I really think, like, let's take it back. Here's what you told me you needed. They can't do these 6 things. Like, are they really a good fit? And sometimes it would work and sometimes not. And then I would have to end up replacing them.
Can you briefly, or however you'd like, tell me how the experience differed in a basic way from working for a company as a hiring manager, as opposed to a recruiting company that hires people for companies?
Yeah, it's 2 different worlds and 2 different styles. So when you are working with an agency recruiter, they are incentivized by how many placements that they get. So every time they get a placement, they're getting some sort of compensation, usually a percentage. If it's in consulting, they're getting like a percentage of every dollar you bill, they get a cut of that. In the corporate world, you're not really getting as much of an incentive. You got a higher base and it's not as much pressure. So
right. So one is commissions and the other one is salary.
Yep. And so the one that's salaried, they tend to be a little bit more, is it the right fit? It's a slower process, whereas on the recruiting world and the agency world, it's like, let's go,
Yeah.
they create a lot of urgency, that type of thing.
Right. And if they hire a poor person, they're going to lose face. And
Yeah.
that's where they have to work with. They're like, oh yeah, who are you going to hire now, Abbie? Frankenstein's monster, and so yeah, it's got to be a very different situation.
Yeah, it is. And they're both fun, like I thought, who would have ever thought I would like recruiting? That's not, I don't know why I loved it, other than it felt really good. Like when I would see people at the companies, and they'd be like so grateful, so it was such a good feeling. But when it went wrong, and you knew that so I just learned early, like as soon as I started seeing warning signs, I learned to speak up, and that's not easy to do. And it's harder to do on the agency side because, everybody around you is like, just get it filled. We'll deal with the consequences later. But it's not worth it, in my opinion.
Which did you prefer? Which side or which situation?
That's such a hard question because I love both. What I like about working for one company is I really got to know, talking about the depth factor, and I could really start to see the personalities and know what different hiring managers need. Whereas on the agency side, you are learning different companies constantly, different hiring managers. You don't have as much time to go deep. But the commission checks on the agency side, they're pretty nice.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? Like, I've liked both.
Now, let me ask you a question now. My company, we're launching an app. It's a revolutionary app, we claim, that's going to transform self-help, usher in a success revolution. It really is. The only reason why we haven't launched yet is we've been undercapitalized. We've been at it for years, but it's going to be launching imminently in the next couple of months. Anyway, nice. That all said, so I'm the head of the company. I'm planning my company. I'm staffing, how it's going to staff out its hierarchical structure, and the company's, when I become the CEO right now, if anyone who calls themselves a CEO and doesn't have a bunch of employees, okay, all right, chief, right?
Yeah,
talking about in the future, right? Well, first of all, the way I'm gonna do my company is I'm going to hire people much smarter and much more able than me to run the company. Right. I'm going to be the head of culture. That's going to be my job. That's what I see this culture. So I have all these, I have my idea of the culture, I describe it. So that will be part of when we hire out, that'll be part of what I ask my hiring manager to look for. And there'll be other nuances and details. How much criteria for a prospect is too much, or too intrusive or unethical or illegal?
Sure. Okay. So here's what I do. So you might want to look up, there's a system called EOS, Entrepreneur Operating Systems. I might have butchered that. But it's a system for, fleshing out your company, and it's usually for founders. I like when you talked about what your role would be, that's a really great system to help you set up who works where. Because what I saw, because I worked with a lot of smaller companies, and usually when you're starting, you will hire anybody, like your cousin, your friends, whatever. And then as soon as you start to have some success, you're like, oh crap, I need people who can actually do the job. Right. Now, you need to be very clear if you're like the founder visionary, or because then they have what they call the operator, or the person who's actually getting everything done. Right. And like setting up those things to be very specific roles. Yep. Because most founders I see try to play both and they can't. So
not me. I'm a very lazy person. I want to delegate and then
I love it. So then you're the visionary. You have the vision for the company and the culture, and you do all of that. Now, when you are creating your, like, who do you need to bring on board? You need, like, I would say you have two lists. What are and I keep it small. It's 3 to 5 things. The candidate has to have these things. there's no negotiating off of this. Like if you're looking for a COO, right, somebody to come in and do that, they have to have done that before at a company at the same similar size and brought them up somewhere, brought a company from 1 million to 10 million, because there's a difference between 10 million to 50 million, from 1 to 10. Like there's differences. So you need to have that set of criteria. Then you have your nice to haves, like, boy, if they also fit this, it would be really, really great. And you create a scorecard. So you have your list, of what is the most important, and you rank it. Now, when you're doing that, like when you're putting it all in there, you want to get as much in there, and then you need to edit. And the best question that I have is, what does this person need to accomplish after they've been there for a year? So look at what the actual tasks are. Then you say, so they've done these things before. That's what you put over on the must-have list. It's the things that relate back to what they have to get done by the end of that next year. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. What I think about when you say that is that I really expect a lot of growth in my company. And so I could see that person becoming, of course, being promoted and handling greater responsibilities. Should I consider that in that consideration, or maybe they stay there and then another leader gets hired that handles a group?
Yeah, I think so. I think you need to hire for where you're at.
Yes.
Because I have seen, and I've seen people hire above, they're like, well, we're going to grow into that. And it doesn't, at least, and again, I know I'm not an MBA, and I haven't seen it all, but I've seen a lot, and that doesn't tend to work because they're not there yet, that person, and they're trying to implement a lot of change. The hardest part that I've seen for most companies is change management, so I would say, get that person, say, hey, this is where I need you to go. If you can grow into this, great. And if not, maybe we need to shift your role, and that's okay, so I would be very honest about that, because you'll get more out of them with what you need at the time, not with their ego going, well, you promised me that I would be CEO in a year and we would be 10 million,
Let me ask you a question. Later on, when I am the CEO, is it okay to actually whip people with a bullwhip? Is that
Absolutely. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
good. Great stuff. Okay, let's take another moment to hear from our sponsor, and we'll come right back with the delightful Abbie Hoffman.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Proficio. How's your financial health? Are you ready for emergencies? What if you actually had in you the wisdom of Benjamin Franklin? There's a reason why his face is on the $100 bill. Visit www.proficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can make certain that you're on the road to be financially independent no matter what happens.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza, and the very valuable Abbie Hoffman. I wanted to make sure I checked myself, because when I said delightful, I mean, I was delighted at this conversation, but the information you're giving is not only very valuable, it's very, for a person, or either side, employer and prospective employee, but it's also very interesting and intriguing from my position. I know there's a lot of people that have my perspective. They want to grow a company. They want to make a company.
Yeah.
How does it work? So great stuff, really great stuff, Abbie. I'm really having a great time, and
I love it.
Delighted at this conversation. Let's shift gears. Okay. Now everybody knows social media, which is a great blessing and curse. And LinkedIn is the serious social media, right? For
Right.
people who are serious, people who want to be professional, they're there for professional reasons. That's where you go. How does a person get found on LinkedIn?
That's a great question. And there are going to be a lot of different answers because the algorithms change. People have different things. Here's what I know from, being a recruiter. We have something called LinkedIn Recruiter. So there's a back end for recruiters usually, and a lot of hiring managers have it too. Like it's sort of the new norm. I was working on LinkedIn before they had LinkedIn Recruiter, right? So like I knew like the back ways to search for people in there and could find people before it was like the place to go. But so what you're looking for is to make sure like in your about section that you have a lot of your keywords. It keeps it very simple, not a ton of paragraphs, because that's a searchable field for recruiters. And then under your jobs, putting in the bullet points and the key points of what you've been responsible for. That way you're hitting all of these buzzwords. And so when you show up on the screen for a recruiter, it's this condensed little version with like the top words. So the more you can put in the words in the, in your headline, in your about section, and your current or last job, those are where you're going to get found.
So reduce verbiage, but include those keywords.
That's the keywords. I'm not a fan of having your resume be your LinkedIn. Your LinkedIn is, I want to find you, and I'm doing that with your keywords. Your resume is, tell me everything you did, what your big accomplishments were. So, it's like it's a more in-depth version, whereas your LinkedIn profile is like get me found, right? Here's the buzzwords for people to search on.
That's an important distinction. And when you consider that, you'll probably, certainly as a perspective of someone looking for a job, that could make a lot of big difference.
Yeah. And then you don't have to stress out over and you can. I've worked with a lot of people, their resume is the same thing as their LinkedIn. It's not the end of the world. However, I always say, I'm like, that's the gift of being a recruiter. I'm like, you got to look at it from the recruiter's perspective. I just want to get you found on there. Then I want to have a quick conversation. Then you can send me the full resume. But if it's too wordy and too much on there, I'm usually going to skip. You have to remember the attention span problem in America. It's real. And so you want to get it so that it's like easily digestible.
Talk about attention span. I'm 57, and obviously the younger people have this is a big problem. But hey, it's not limited to them. I have it too. And it's like,
we all do now.
Something shiny, social media. It's just incredible. Let me ask you this. As a recruit, now you're a hiring coach, right? You help people get hired, right?
Yep.
Is that what you do mainly now?
That is. I decided to take a little break. I wanted to do something on my own, and my passion comes from helping people. And I like to help the hiring managers. And I really, because for me, I've been doing it for I've been doing it way too long. It's just second nature. It seems, a lot of experience. I'm like, it's like common knowledge, but it's not when you're not looking for a job. And so I do enjoy helping people like refine their resumes and like give them some strategy of how to go about the job search. It just takes some of the mystical, like, oh, I'll never get found in the world of the internet, and you can.
And now, of course, it's almost redundant internet age, but geography is so less of a factor now, right? And now, how much, obviously we're just coming out of the pandemic, but I think, obviously not to downplay the pandemic, obviously significant. People ask me about my business, which is a totally digital business. They're like, oh, you must have loved the pandemic, in this business perspective. Yeah. I said, well, it's good for digital business, but from my perspective, my business, it's irrelevant. My business plan, the merit of my product stands on its own. It didn't need any pandemic to increase the need. But the fact is that we're in a digital age. You can work remotely more than ever. The pandemic kind of exacerbated that. People are more accommodating that way. How does it play out as a recruiter, as a hiring coach? It's someone who has a finger on the pulse of hiring and working.
So right after the pandemic, for a little while, it's like the wild, wild west. Anybody was fair game, right? Because you could work from anywhere. And we were telling clients, like, this is amazing. You can find the best talent across the world instead of having them needing to be within a 20, 30 mile radius of your office. So that was really, really great, where I think now you can see it shifting back, and it's more about hybrid so depending on the firm, it's 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office, and then from home. And I think it depends on the company. Smaller companies can tend to do the remote option, but the larger the company, I saw it impacts culture and people's ability to connect and do stuff. If it's a new team, when you bring new people on, you have to do more work. Whereas when it's a established team, it's like remote's fine, right? You guys already have the connections, all of that. But when it's new, and that's where I saw people, like companies were really struggling, and so they went with the hybrid process, and
Wow.
that seems to be the new norm, at least for now.
Wow, thanks so much for that input. That's, I mean, I have my ideas, but you really know.
Yeah, I saw it happening and I saw it shifting, kind of like for a while, everybody would relocate. Like it was like a 10-year period, like anybody would relocate and anybody would travel. And then I watched it, then everybody started going, I kind of miss being around family. And so now it's harder, for people to relocate. Like that doesn't happen nearly as often as it did 20 years ago.
So from a person looking for a job, and whatever, whether it be irrelevant to the pandemic, if a candidate has a break on their resume, which
Yeah.
a lapse, right? What is the best way to explain that to a hiring manager?
Yeah. So it's always circumstantial.
Can
but
they say they were abducted by an alien?
I probably wouldn't say that. But it's like, I've heard a lot of things that I haven't heard. But
You haven't seen my resume, Abbie.
I think you always need to be honest and upfront about your breaks. And I coach people. That's one of the biggest things. I'm like, let's talk this through until you say it so often that it just flows, because we sense when you are hesitant or you're feeling insecure about why you were let go, or you were, because sometimes, so my question I'll ask, oh, you were in a layoff, how many people were laid off? Because if there's only one person laid off and that was you, I know that they just didn't want to tell you that you were getting fired, right? Like, so, or, but if like, oh, it was 160 people out of a team of 1,000. Okay. You probably were, last in, or whatever the case may be. And the truth is, I've heard some doozies. There are some really toxic work situations out there. People have been through it. And so you need to learn when you go into the interview to just stick to the facts. Don't get into the emotions of it and be like, I was in a really toxic situation. I really tried to stick it out for the year, but I found that I just couldn't. I was not a good fit for this person. And so we agreed to part ways. Like, just being very direct and honest about that.
What if they had done something unethical or illegal? What about that? Because that happens. So should people, what should they do?
It does. And you're not going to get hired if you're, like I had a candidate, we said, we're going to do a background check, no problem. And then they started in the accounting department. And 2 days later, after they were already in there, we got it back. They were in process of going to court for embezzlement. We like, what?
They didn't wait.
They didn't. I mean, so my thing is, like, you need to be honest. I think if you go in and you lie, you're taking a chance. If you get caught, then you just have to say, of course, I didn't want to tell you, that this was the case. But you also need to talk about how you have fixed it, how you've remedied it, or what you've learned from it. Like, if somebody comes from that approach, I'm like, okay, everybody makes mistakes, but did you own it? So if you're owning your mistake, owning your thing, saying, I got caught up in the wrong crowd, or whatever your situation was, this happened, but now here's the steps I took to fix it. 1, I cut ties. 2, I did this. I'm like, okay, let's talk more. I'll at least give you a shot.
So to distill it or paraphrase, be honest and be a self-improver.
Yeah. Yes.
That's it.
Do the work, because everybody makes mistakes. There's not one person in the corporate world who hasn't made a mistake somewhere, so a lot of hiring managers will forgive it if you own it.
Great stuff. Now you've been at this 25 years, right?
Yeah.
Give me your craziest story.
Oh gosh, I have so many.
give me the craziest one, Abbie.
Okay, here's one. I had a guy come in. So in my corporate world, it was a situation where the hiring managers really trusted me. But I would do, me and my psychology major, I would do a full, like, more culture fit, more just who are you, and what are you like to fit in with this hiring manager. Like I think that's really important. And so I was getting deep, and I like to get personal with the candidates and asking them deep questions. And this guy ended up telling me, and I have another funny one that I just remembered. He ended up telling me that he was having drug issues, that he was doing a lot of cocaine and all this stuff. And I just was like, what? But he got comfortable, and so he wanted to share that, and I'll never forget it. And then I had another woman. This is even crazier. She was, I did, it was I did a phone screen with her. She went, I was having a weird sense. She was interviewing in Florida with some hiring managers in Florida, and she did the interview. Then I interviewed her, and I was like, oh no, she is crazy. I was like, there's no way. And they loved her. They were like, Abbie, she's in. And I said, I have one guess. She's probably really beautiful. And they were like, well, yeah. And I was like, I'm telling you, she's crazy. I was like, don't hire her. Do you know what she went and did?
What?
She went and put all three of us, put all of our emails. We were inundated with like porn sites, like all of these things. We were like, somehow we connected like a day or two later. And I was like,
God.
Something happened. And we're like, oh, you too. And I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
She was so mad she didn't get the job. Yeah. I have like 10 more I could tell you. People have done some crazy things.
That was great. Okay, let's take our final break to hear from our sponsor. And unfortunately, it'll be the last segment with Abbie because this is really such a great conversation. So we'll be right back with Abbie.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perficio. What if you could get the results of being coached without a human coach? What if a computer could coach you? Visit www.perficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can get coached without scrutiny, judgment, or pressure.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza. We're having a fantastic conversation with Abbie Martin. We're talking about hiring. She just told us one of the craziest stories about, well, if you didn't listen to it, then rewind it. Great stuff. Now, great, obviously we're talking about people getting hired, and, then people might think that, it might be arduous or complex. What are some mindset hacks or tricks to seem more confident in an interview? Because that is, if not the most important, I don't want to say the most important thing, but if you got the credentials, but you're unconfident,
Yeah,
you ain't going to get it.
it's true. I've seen a lot of really great people who did really well with me in the screen. I'm like, they're a slam dunk. And they just whiffed in the interview because they got nervous because they were meeting with an executive. And the one thing that I've learned over the years is that executives put their pants on the same as everybody else. And they get really scared of them, but they shouldn't, right? So you need to, the best way and the best coaching that I do is you got to practice and practice and practice your answers. Knowing, why do you want this job? You have to know, why do you think you're a good fit? Like, can you roll that through? Knowing some stuff you can't fudge, right? Like if a hiring manager is doing a good interview and they're asking you behavioral interview questions that go 3 layers deep, you can't maintain a lie on that. Like you either know it or you don't type of situation. So knowing and then being able to say, I don't know that part, but I'd be willing to learn, or being honest about that, but just practicing, when you go in, keeping it refined and succinct. And I tell people, I'm like, if you get really nervous before you go in, you can like tap right here, just because that calms your nervous system down.
Most people are listening. She's pointing to her chest or above her sternum.
Yeah. And so you just like tap that. I will hold and pinch a nail into my thumb to just remind
Distract.
myself to breathe. And before you start answering a question, take a deep breath.
Mm,
There's no reason, because people start to just, and it becomes like a train wreck, right? Like they
sure.
just start talking so fast that they forget to breathe.
Right.
And so just getting yourself in a position of, if this is mine, it'll be here for me. And if it's not, so if you can go in and you're like, I really want this, but if I don't, I know that something better is coming. You can be in a better position of just not seeming desperate, like, and because hiring managers are looking for, does this person make me feel safe? Can this person do the job? How do I feel when I'm around this person? So, showing that confidence is going to get you further in that interview, more so than your skill set, believe it or not.
And I'm here to say, as a practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming, which is a form of psychology that focuses on how people think, not why or what, but how. And it has a lot to do with the body, our neurology is from head to toe. And these things you talked about the physical person, people may think that's trivial or unimportant. No.
Yeah.
No. Breathing, sensations in the body, whatever, very important.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a little more maybe woo-woo, as I like to call it. But the other thing I do is I just like turn it over, right? Like I'm like,
No,
like
it's not woo-woo at all.
like angels help me, like just help me, guide me, let me come through. And as soon as I do that, I'm always feel better when I'm walking into a situation before I get on a podcast. It's like a little prayer. It's like, like let me get my crazy self out of the way.
No, that's not
So,
woo-woo at all. And
yeah.
let me give my take on that, and I'm a recovered drug addict. Been, I think, 22 years this month, whatever.
Nice, congratulations.
And I was in the AA, NA, but now I was a life coach and NLP, blah, blah. Okay. When we know that we have weaknesses and strengths, and we have insecurities or deficiencies. And that when we make decisions or when we think, that's who's making them. But if we have this idea of this thing, or entity, element that doesn't have those, if you even just imagine it, who says has to be true, that it doesn't have that, and you can have a relationship with that thing where you can have faith and trust in that thing that can help you without the weaknesses.
Yeah.
Then why wouldn't you make that person your co-pilot? Or that thing, your co-pilot.
Yeah, however that works. And
Right.
I'd like to add one more thing, because
Sure.
I get frustrated with candidates and they can't have a weakness. My weakness is that I work too hard. And I'm like, BS. I'm like, all of us have failed. All of us have not shown up in our best and highest self at some point in time. Own it. And when you do that, it comes across so much more authentically, like, so people, it's like, get rid of the perfection energy. Come in and be authentic with who you are, what you can really do. And they're going to be like, okay, I can work with that. Because somebody will say, I'll train you, I'll do all of that because you've got the work ethic.
Absolutely. You want to be professional, you want to present, but you don't want to pretend you're perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm my resume, and first thing it says in big font, lazy. And then when I go to the interview, I'm like, listen, I'm so lazy, you're lucky I even showed up. Now, am I hired? No, you don't want to be stupid, but you want to be real. You want to be real.
Exactly.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
Abbie, this has been a wonderful conversation. I think very, very valuable to not just a prospective employee or person who wants to get hired, but on the other side too. And for people that want to know more about recruiting and hiring, let me say, as I said before, I'm planning my future company as it steps out, and the HR department, I told how culture most interests me, and I have a proclivity for it, and organizations. And so my my HR department that I planned is by far the biggest department, because if I think my mentality is, if I've taken care of my people on multiple levels, on every professional level, then they are going to take care of me as the boss, and they are going to kick ass. My sentiment is, I want to make a company that people will kill to work for.
Yeah,
That's what I want.
Yeah.
I don't mind saying, I said that all that preface just to say this first thing. So in this hiring department that I've written, that I've created, the very first manager I wrote down was hiring manager, because that is really, that's the genesis. We've got to hire people, and we got to hire the right people. And I have a process. The hiring manager is the first person, then there's a sequence of interviews, but that is the critical thing for a company. You got to hire what you think are the right people. There has to be a process of, and you're not getting in. You are the gatekeeper.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you get that person right, and you get aligned, and you let them push you, Tony, it'll be much better, because a lot of hiring managers just want everybody that, like, it's unconscious. They just want to hire other Tonys, I see myself in that person. And so this other person can help you be more diversified in who you're hiring, because, you don't want all Tonys. You need a wide variety.
Abbie, there can only be one.
Exactly. But I see it happen so much, and it's like the hiring manager becomes their own worst enemy, because they they're looking for that piece of themselves, instead of saying, oh, this person can bring value in a different way.
Absolutely. That I receive great benefit from that. I have a partner, and we are yin and yang.
Yeah.
We are so different, and it's such a blessing. I'm like, oh, we're gonna do all this thing. We're gonna, he's like, no. But the good thing though is I'm the senior partner, so I get the ultimate decision.
I love it.
But he does ground me, because he's like, no, you can't do that. But then I get him to go, yes, but he get in a grounded way. But you want different strengths or weaknesses, or different strengths, I should say, even more precisely. But great stuff. I really appreciate this interview and meeting you. Do you have any final remarks for the audience?
I wanted to offer a checklist for candidates. I actually,
Please.
on my website, it's strategictalentadvisor.com. If you go under the member section, I have you do a podcast, I'm giving away the checklist for free. So candidates can have that to go in there. You just put in the podcast in your email, and you'll get a link to download that. It's, like, to me, it's common sense, but everybody else who's gotten it, they're like, oh my God, like, it's, like, each step of the hiring process, it gives you kind of some things to think through. So it's pretty valuable.
Great stuff. And of course, you're on social media, LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm mostly doing LinkedIn for Strategic Talent Advisor. So I have a company page, and then Abbie Martin, which, I put more of my content on, because LinkedIn likes to do it more on the people than it does the company side.
That's Abbie with an I-E, A-B-B-I-E, Martin.
Yeah. Abbie
So
Martin.
the website is strategictalentadvisor.com, or you can find Abbie on LinkedIn. Great stuff. Abbie, I really appreciate it's been wonderful, and it gave me some things to think about and
I love
to
it.
consider. So great stuff. So really appreciate you. And if you are looking for a job or considering your career, I encourage and recommend that you go to strategictalentadvisor.com. Check out what Abbie has to offer. She's a hiring coach. And she has
help people clean up their LinkedIn profiles, get good resumes from the perspective of how to get the recruiter's attention. So
that's the one that counts.
Yeah,
that's the one that you want. Great stuff. So go there, go to her website, check her out on LinkedIn. And I want to remind everyone that we're all responsible for ourselves, and we could all use a little help. With that, thanks for listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast. Thank you, Abbie Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, where insights, attitudes, and methods for success get illuminated. Learn what leaders and change workers have done and are doing now to create magnificent futures. Remember to visit our website at self-helpcoaching.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Self-Help Coaching Podcast.